All right, I'm back. It's been a day or two. I'm going to do a summary on this intellitronix digital cluster for this 79, actually 78 Ford F-150. This was 4x4, so one thing I can say, the speedo sensor may be in a different spot. On this one, you can't miss it. Good thing about these trucks, don't really need to jack them up, do things. You can climb up under them. But this speedo was in the back of the transmission, right at the drive shaft. So there's that one sensor, 3 wires. Black went to ground, red needs a 12-volt switch. I run it up to the same switch power as the gauge itself, and white goes to the gauge. Okay, your second out of the 3 sensors is right on the bottom. If I can see it, it's right under the breather on the back of the intake. Kind of hard to get to. You see some shiny silver down there, actually gold. It has 2 wire. Getting that old one out was a booger. Getting the new one in was a booger. And 1 wire is ground and 1 wire goes to your gauge. The third switch is right there where the yellow wire is going, is your temp sender. It's just a 1 wire that goes straight to the gauge. Only thing is, I had to modify every one of these senders. The transmission sender just had to use the old O-ring. Hopefully yours is still good. If not, go to Home Depot, Ace, and grab one. So it will be tight. The new O-ring they sent was way too thick. The oil pressure sender was the wrong size. I pulled it out, had to get a bushing for it. And the temp sender was the wrong size. It was too small. Had to get a bushing for it. So, you know, the transmission sender, I had to also grind off the elbow, the mounting bracket. So all 3 senders had to be modified in some kind of way, and you need to get some 18 gauge red, white, green, and blue, unless you want to do some tape, and I wanted all different colors so I didn't get messed up. Red, black, green, blue, and actually if you can pick up some yellow or another color, 5 different colors to help you out, because I made my own little wiring harness, 3 wires coming all the way from that transmission speed sender back up into the firewall. That was 3 colors. Then I had some other colors I needed. You really don't need probably 20-30 feet, but go ahead and have that ready. You're going to have to make some trips to the parts store unless your stuff is different. It comes out and it works. So if you have the wire on hand, you're going to need some heat shrink 18 gauge butts. Probably going to need at least 30-40 of those. So if you go ahead and have the wire and butts ready, I suggest heat shrink, especially under the hood. I also did them behind the gauge. And you know, I just tidied up all the wires. I was going to make this video as quick as possible as a summary, but I want to take this light out because you do have to run to a parking lot to have the dimming feature for your gauges. So let me get this screw out. So I ran it to here. And what it is, I used a green wire, and there's a hole right down in here. You can go through and feed it right back to this parking lot. I did a meter, figured out the wire, but make it easier on you, I'll show you which one it is. It was kind of, these wires are all discolored now, maybe brown with a blue, but definitely the black is the ground. Tapped into that and it works. I got dimming feature, and you really need it. These gauges are super bright at night. They are going to blind you. That's the senders. That was the toughest part of this job, getting the bushings, getting to them, getting them tight, hoping they didn't leak, which they didn't. Haven't looked at the transmission one, but I haven't saw anything. So in the truck, this is actually your button to change from, because this thing don't have its own tack. So you can switch in between on the bottom here between tack, trip, and odometer. And you see I have my fuel. There's 2 dip switches back here you'll see in your instructions. Don't even worry about ohming them bad boys out. You're going to need to hook this gauge up before you do any of these beauty pieces and make sure everything's working. We knew we had about half a tank, maybe a little more, so I kept messing with the dip switches. You got 1 and 2. They're either on or off, so both up, both down, one up, one down, one down, one up, and you'll be able to figure out, you know, what the closest is for your fuel. There's no calibration, that's it. So I got it to 62. It goes from 0 to 99. So half a tank should be around 50. We knew we had a little over half a tank, so this is the closest I could get with anywhere I could put those switches. You see you got your oil pressure, your volts. There is a fine tune for the volts, a button about right in this area, you know, on the gauge. Truck's got to be running. Check your volts on your battery while the truck's running, then you can turn that dial to match it up. And you got your temp, mile per hour is working. We had to calibrate it, and how that works is, to save a little homework, is we got land here, so we was able to figure out a mile on the land without getting on the road. But they say find a starting point and an ending point for 1 mile. You go in and there's instructions. You use this button and you start there, and it'll count. It'll start counting on the gauge. Pulse is what it is. And at the end of that mile, you stop, tap that button again, and it will basically calibrate your speedometer based on how many pulses that mile took. Now, it don't matter how fast you're going, but it does matter that you do not stop until you're at the end of that mile. Tap that button, and it did work, because before we was about 5 miles too fast, around the 30 mile an hour zone. We was about 10 mile an hour too fast, 60 and above. So as it went up, we was getting up normal highway speed. We was going to be at least 10 mile an hour faster than we thought we was going. After the calibration, it got it a lot closer. We might be off a mile or so. 78 truck, it wasn't working in the first place. So there we go. Your blinkers are involved in this thing, which you got to be careful. These have little green lens. I actually broke that one, but I was able to somewhat glue it back. You have the bright light feature. Tells you the bright light's on. My button, oh, I gotta turn the lights on first. See, it'll light up blue for you to tell you your brights are on. Now there's 2 more features that it has, which is belt and brake. They don't work in this truck. I could rewire them and figure it out, but don't care about that. You got your fasten seat belt, and it's actually a wire for it on this gauge to use it, but we did not focus on that at all. We know when the brake's on, and we know if we got our seat belt on. Speedo has a lag, so when you first do this, you'll be going, holy crap, this thing ain't working. It's only showing me going 1 mile an hour, and I should be going like 5. It's going to have a lag in the beginning. You're going from a Speedo gear to a digital, running up into this gauge, so there is a lag, but once you get going, it's fine. When we first started, this thing was like, oh crap, this Speedo ain't working, because we went probably 50 feet or so, 100 feet, and it kicked in. So as far as the senders we went over, wiring is pretty self-explanatory. I've got that in my other video. I made a diagram, found a diagram online also. I believe I put a video that if you want to screenshot it. I'm not a YouTube expert on having videos and music and all this stuff. So wanted to do this to help. I do a lot of modifications and things. I actually did this for a friend, but a lot of times I'm in too big of a hurry. I just don't want to spend time, but couldn't find anything 100% on doing this job, and it was kind of a booger. So, you know, don't think you're going to buy it and do it in a few hours. You know, you're going to have to take your time, but this video is going to save you a ton of time on homework and things that I've found, you know, that you're going to have to do. Get wire, be ready to go get some bushings, take them both out, go get the bushing at the same time, save yourself some time there. Get some different color wire instead of trying to do all that and get confused. This thing's confusing enough. As far as wiring, once you got the wiring diagram, you're going to use the same wire for the fuel sender. It's going to go right in to your gauge. You're going to use the same wire that's in your harness for the temperature. You're going to use the same wire for your oil pressure. The only difference in that is you're going to have to run the ground to that sender, which your original one did not have. Blinkers, they hook up into the harness. Tack, that's what I wanted to go over. Your tack wire is on the firewall, and it is here. It's on the firewall green, and it was green and yellow. But what it is you can tie in at the coil, but this wire right here, it says tack right there. That's your wire. So I just followed it back to the firewall to tap into. That's going to save you some time. So that wire is going to come through the firewall on its own and tap in to the tack. For that, your odometer is going through your speedo. Volts it does on its own once you hook it up. So it's pretty, once you get the senders in, it's pretty self-explanatory after that. But you want to do the gauge by itself. Be careful not to touch anything and short anything out. Use a towel back there or whatever. But you're going to have that board just sitting in there while you're driving it and checking things out. And it's a little touchy. Unplug your battery before you put all this together. You'll have your board. In the middle will be some spacers and little bolts and nuts. Then your new tinted glass. And then you take a little time and screw it onto here. I actually took this glass off to clean behind it. These are just little push pins. So you're going to have to put it together behind the steering wheel. Don't put it together in your garage and go, I'm going to put this thing in, because then you can't get back to your dip switch or your fine adjust for your bolts. And you just don't want to put all that together and have to take it back apart because you think you got it, because you will not. Other than that, that should save you some time. I didn't try to tap into here. One thing I did forget, for a ground, just find a certain place, ground it. For your, and I just took this gauge out too, switch power. Man, I can't get back to it. There was a original wiring harness for the radio. It's a 2-wire, and it was yellow with a gray plug. God, I think I've got a picture of it that I'll figure out how to post in a link. Tried to get continuous power from this little tree. It's a yellow tree, got 3 little plugs in it. It would show 12 volts until I hooked something to it, then it would drop to 3. It wouldn't even come on. At first I plugged this thing in, turned the switch on, nothing. I was like, oh my God. What it was is that switch power was no good. Radio power was. As soon as I hooked it to that, because you're going to have to hook your speed sensor there and your gauge to have, when you turn the switch, it's going to kick it on. And your dimmer is going to go into the dimmer switch. It's all written on the back of this new gauge, wherever wire goes. And if you look at my diagram, you'll see the colors and you'll be able to match them up. Makes it pretty simple. I wish I forgot about that switch power. But it's right behind the radio, and if you need to, get your voltmeter. And you have 2 wires going into that. So I can't really think of anything else that may help. I mean, it's pretty good after you get the senders in. Make sure they're nice and tight. I did use pipe dope on the temperature. It said not to, but I did not want that thing to leak, and it's reading perfect. And I forgot to use any pipe dope on the oil or any, I did use it on the sender that plugged into the bushing, but I forgot to put it on the bushing. So, but it's not leaking. Just get the senders done first and just be ready for it. It's a timely install. But I mean, as you can see, it's going to look good. So I'm going to turn the lights on. You see it dim. You want that because these things are bright. You can see just in the camera. They're going to blind you at night if you don't have that on. Other than that, any questions, hit me up. That's something I forgot. Be careful with this plastic. Glass was still pretty good, but this could be a little brittle back here. The old gauge that attached to this in the back was, you just touch it and it fall apart. And what happened, the reason they wanted to go this route was they had no more lights at night. I mean, oil pressure wasn't working. I think the speedometer was still working, but it was off pretty bad. And the odometer was still working, but that was about it. So they thought $400, plug and play. But it's not plug and play. You're going to be plugging and playing all right. Unless you wake up in the morning, it's going to take you, if you really stay at it, you might get done if you wake up before light and go to bed at dark. But you're going to have to put a weekend probably into this. But with this video, man, I did a lot of homework. Like I said, I found one video where the guy showed how to put the gauge together. Take the old gauge off, put the new gauge on, but he did it in his house. And after doing this, I'm thinking, no, dude, you left yourself no room to fine-tune anything or make sure stuff's working and have to take it all back apart. And when you wire this thing, unless you put the splices in that you can pull back apart, which I wouldn't suggest, they get corroded, this thing's going to be hardwired in. But you see, you got a lot of room back there. I mean, there's going to be no reason. Leave yourself enough wire. You've got plenty of wire where you can pull it back out and get back here if you need to. But this thing's going to be in for good unless you cut it back out. So you don't want to be taking this thing in and out. And even when I did it and thought I had it wired right, I still, didn't have my constant power right. So you want to get this thing right with just a gauge, but then again, don't short out the back. You got circuits back there, so you got to be careful. Put a towel up or something, or while you're doing major work, unhook the battery so you don't have no power and short something out. Hit me up. I hope this helps. Like I said, I couldn't find any videos or, in detail to save all this time. It took a lot of homework. And I did have to call intellitronix, and they said ohm out the fuel sender, and I'm thinking, no, that didn't work. So I just adjusted it when I got it hooked up, and they send you about a 10-foot thing of black wire you can use for ground, which I used, but they send you one bushing for the temperature sender. So the temperature sender is pretty small, fine thread, and the bushing was pretty big. Well, the temperature sender was too small, bushing was too big. So, I mean, the instructions are kind of a joke. The instructions are good on how to tell you to calibrate your speedometer, but the rest of it is like, pull out your old gauge, take the back wall off, put the new one on, da-da-da-da-da, and it's like, no, I mean, there's no pictures. And when you do find something online, you're sitting there trying to follow it, and that's no good. So hopefully this will help. Y'all have a good day, and wherever you are, and if you have any questions, send me a message.